got sort of the final site plan in December. And we were looking at it, and some people had some questions on the location of the building on the site. And specifically, John Cummings did raise some questions about it and sort of where it was located on the site. And so what we did is Doran Whittier actually met John out at the site in January and sort of did a walkthrough where they did an overlay, and they really tried to understand, you know, the site in relation to the everything around it. And John, I think also, and a number of us have also spoken with some neighbors. And I think we, as you recall, we were really trying to minimize our impact on this piece of property. We really wanted to sort of make sure that we were not taking too much of the woods and encroaching. And I think what has become evident over the last week is that in doing so, we may have gone a little too close to the neighborhood in our efforts to try to minimize impact on the woods. And by neighborhood specifically, I'm talking about the Laura Lane neighborhood, which, as everybody can recall, is sort of right there. So what so the past few days, this is all sort of breaking news, by the way. So the past few days, we've really taken a look at this issue to the extent you can in 2 days. And Doran Whittier has done a lot of work, and Compass has done a lot of work reviewing this. And for various reasons, we think it may be beneficial to actually shift the site of the building to create a bigger buffer between Laura Lane and the school. And there's a number of reasons why we may want to do this. So first, as I said, this would create a bigger buffer, and we're always conscious of, you know, one of the goals of this group has been to be a good neighbor. We're always conscious of the neighbors. We're always listening to feedback. I know this was a concern of the neighbors. So this increased buffer, I think, is in line with things we have been doing in this project. Another advantage actually is that it actually brings us, this shift could potentially bring us further from the wetlands buffer. Right now, we're right up on that wetlands buffer. This shift may actually give us more breathing room from that buffer, which I think is beneficial for the project. And finally, you know, this is really the time to do these kinds of shifts because we're still in schematic, we're still, you know, 25% of the design in, and now is the time to do it. I know Tim has mentioned that to me, that he's been on other projects where they have found this much later in the process or made this decision later in the process, and it's been an issue. But if we're going to do this, we need to get it right the first time. I realize, you know, it's important, you know, we're discussing the budget today. This would impact the site portion of the budget. But I think it's important for this group to discuss this and to really understand it. And so I wanted to raise the issue. I'm actually going to throw it to John, just so he's been very intimately involved with, you know, over the past month with sort of looking at this issue. So John, do you have any thoughts on this?
I do.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do.
If you guys remember, I brought it up in June where that fire access trail is. And that's what everybody's calling the blue path. So if you take your diagram and you were to go right down Laurel Lane.
Sorry, John, to interrupt you. Chin, do you have something that you could, I know we were looking at something yesterday. Do you have something you could throw up to give people something to look at?
Yeah, give me.
Thanks, John, sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Going down Laurel Lane, the fire trail actually goes straight for another 150 yards, which is at the second half of this, let's say 75 up, goes uphill probably about 15 feet through that next 75 yards. Then it takes us a dip down to the left, which brings it to the Mulville property, and then goes hard to the right. There's 10 years ago, there was probably a dozen people walking that path a day. Now there's got to be 200 or 300 people walking that day with COVID, and they've realized the gem that this particular trail is. So I'll wait, Chin, if you got that picture. So if you look at the diagram that they gave us,
do you want the revised or the revised one?
No, the original one.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Give me a second.
Worries.
Do you want me to zoom in?
I don't see it at all.
We don't see it.
Actually, put up the presentation, Chin. It's the first. It's on that first slide.
So essentially, when we first looked at it in June, the project was south or west of the fire access trail. And then when the final revision came in, or the most recent revision came in December, it actually, a good portion of it goes over the fire trail. Actually abuts, it goes right up behind the house that's on Laura Lane now. And so instead of being in the woods, we are now in the neighborhood. And so when I met with Doran Whittier, Glenn and I, we walked through and he agreed that the trail went straight through, and that was pretty much down from the middle of the gym, everything on the, so I'm just gonna go with old school in front of the camera. Different angle, there we go.
Chin, do you want to send it to me? I can try and put it
Killing
up.
me, Chin.
I
So
know.
this is the current, this is about the current, what's the current, John, is that about right?
We're not seeing anything, Chin.
Nothing's coming through, Chin.
Okay.
Are you sharing
sorry.
your screen?
I thought I was.
Does he have the power to share the screen?
Okay.
There we go. Okay.
Sorry
hang on.
about that.
All right, so the red trail that you see here goes almost through the cafeteria, goes through the music room, goes through the playground in the back, goes through, I mean, so.
Yeah, this is the
You drive up-
existing fire trail, what we're calling, it's a trail. To all intents and purposes, to us, it looks like the trail that everyone takes to access Laurel Woods from Laura Lane. But it actually, the fire department does use it. That's why John is referring to it as a fire access trail, because the fire department does use it to get to in the event there would be a fire in those backwoods. So they would use that. So we knew all along we had to maintain this fire access trail. And sorry, John, I just totally interrupted you. So go ahead.
So essentially if you look at it here, you can see how it's now not only straight ahead of Laura Lane, but to the right of Laura Lane, or to the northern side of Laura Lane. And if you look, you can
the
see the house.
curvy line you're talking about now,
Right.
That curvy line.
So right now you can see where it says Laura Lane, and you can see the outprint of the houses right there.
This is the house.
Yeah, and sorry, just to be clear, when the building is complete, it's sort of the idea that the fire trucks, to access this fire lane, would actually come in the parent loop, take that left onto that fire road, and then connect with the fire access trail up there. So that's sort of what sort of the idea is once the project's complete. However, we need to maintain access to this fire trail throughout the project. So originally this wavy line was what we were thinking, or what the site had sketched out as being a way to sort of access that fire access trail during construction. So I just want to be clear.
Fire apparatus won't make it down that trail.
Right. So that's what and I think there may have been a little bit of a disconnect about whether or not what the purpose of that trail was. I think that so we're the past few months we've been trying to rectify that and make sure that whatever temporary or permanent trail is put in is sufficient for fire purposes as well. Right. So that's sort of that was the first problem that we tried to address. And then in doing that, I think we realized that the building is just, and John, I keep interrupting you.
It's because you know way more than I do. There's a 3D rendering that if they could pull up, you'd just be horrified that we were going to put this building where it is. And you also, if you look due south, right below the parking lots, that's all wetlands, right? So that's kind of been pushing the project up toward Laura Lane. However, we have 100 feet to the buffer zone on the west side, right where the blue dot is. We can slide this 100 feet, pulling it away from the wetlands and away from Laura Lane at the same time. So that if you were to drive up Laura Lane, you would not be looking at any buildings at all. You might see the back corner because it's 100 feet deeper, you might see the back corner of the gymnasium, and everything would go around it to the side.
Yeah. So I think, so the idea, and that's what we've asked. And so that's why when John and Glenn walked the property, these are sort of the things they talked about. And that's why we got, we sort of asked Doran Whittier to take a quick look. Okay, well, what else could we do? So this is now showing it shifted. Okay, so you can see now there's about 134 feet from the edge of that property line to where the building, it's not even the building, it's that driveway starts. We've also reconfigured the driveway, the parking lot back there a little bit, and put in the proposed fire access trail, which we think would work for fire purposes. Certainly temporarily while we're doing construction. And then again, I mean, they could still continue to use it if they wanted to, or they could come in through the loop.
Okay, has anybody looked at this with John Deckers yet?
This is
Yes.
literally, we talked about this yesterday. So this is, like I said, this is the first time we're raising it with this group. We haven't raised it with, now John Cummings had a conversation with Fire Chief Deckers yesterday, and Fire Chief Deckers confirmed the need for the fire trail, right? He said, yes, absolutely. So he is aware that we're trying to make this work.
But he hasn't seen the actual layout yet because it's too
No.
soon.
This was literally, I think, drafted last night.
Yeah, I'll be able to send him this morning. When we're through.
So,
and
so
we're gonna
this
walk
is-
it, Nancy. We're gonna walk it on Monday morning.
yeah, and John Fire Chief Deckers are going to meet Monday morning with this to walk it. So there is, as I said, the good news about this is that there's no change to the schedule. You know, we can still, we're gonna, Doran Whittier and Compass are gonna work incredibly hard for the next week to really kind of nail down what is the cost impact so that we can have that information for our next Friday meeting. So today, when we go through the budget, you know, all of the numbers will look the same, except what might change is that what will change if we move forward with this site shift is the site work number. That number will likely go up. We're still trying to understand the degree, and it could be that, you know, we maybe only shift it 50 feet, or we shift it the full 100 feet, or we shift it 75 feet. We're not, you know, we're, like I said, this is sort of, you know, I'm glad we caught this now. Would it have been better if we caught it a month ago? Probably. But we're catching it now. We're trying to address the needs now. And so we're trying to get numbers now. And I think it's way too soon to speculate on the cost impact. I will say it will be in the hundreds of thousands, whether it's 300,000, 700,000, that we don't know quite yet. We will know that. The good news also is that because of value engineering, because we did such a good job with that, we actually have room in the project budget to absorb this cost and still be under the target project cost that we had set. So, and if people aren't comfortable, you know, certainly in design development, we can look at additional value engineering opportunities. This design, remember, we're still in schematic design. We're still only about 25% through the design, believe it or not. So we will have more opportunities if we want to continue to look for ways to bring that cost down. But but we're going to work hard in the next week to get sort of as real numbers as we can, which will probably be similar to the sort of realness of the rest of the numbers that we have, to really understand the cost impact of this shift. John, did I see you?
Yes, I did.
Okay, go ahead.
So I walk the trail every day with my dog. Plus I was, without the dog, I was still walking the trail. And I talk to people every day, and our neighbors, not just my neighbors, but all of our neighbors are very concerned about making sure we don't ruin the integrity of the woods right here where everybody uses it. You know what I'm saying? So they're like, so is this path going to be here? Are we going to be able to access this from Laura Lane? Are we going to be able to walk every day? The PTO actually has a storybook all the way through the woods posted up. So it's a well-used
Yeah.
trail.
And one of our goals, remember, has always been, I mean, we've been saying this at community meeting after community meeting, that we want to maintain the, you know, access from the Hanlon School to Laura Lane, and to Laura Lane, to Lowell Woods. And if anything, we want to maybe make improvements to that access if we can, like with a trailhead and maybe with a couple parking spots near the trailhead. So we're, you know, those are still goals of this project, and this is in line with those goals. being a good neighbor is in line with those goals, is in line with our goals. And I think that this shift would make a significant impact to the residents, particularly on Laura Lane.
And so
And
we're listening to them.
and we are truly listening to them. So as I said, I do want to open this up for questions. I just want to remind, we do need to go through the budget. So I'd love, we certainly need to talk about this, and I want to open it up. And so anyway, I'm going to stop talking. What do people think?
May I think we should get Chief Deckers to join us at the meeting next week, just after all this is reviewed, to have him present and able to confirm hopefully what will be his support. But I know there's a lot of work to be done, but please have him here next week.
Yep, we can absolutely do that.
I have a question, Maya.
Yep.
So it looks like back, towards the end of the proposed new trail, it's somewhat close in proximity to the kids' play area out back there. So what will be in place to kind of separate the trail versus the school property? Will it be fencing? Will it be wood? Just the natural woods? Obviously,
Yep.
thinking about safety and the dogs and all of that.
Yep. So this is literally a line that Shin dropped, or that Rob dropped in yesterday. I think we're going to doing a lot more thinking about where this blue access trail line should go. And it doesn't necessarily have to be so close there. It just needs to connect with the existing fire access trail at some point. So I think we have a lot more work to do around that, but certainly one of the considerations will be, how close is it to the school? Is it, we certainly don't want the kids to be able to jump on this trail and take off into the woods. So those will definitely be considerations that we look at. But like I said, this line, I don't think is, we're going to take those considerations into place.
I think it's fair to say that in the next phase of development, that the separation right around here will be factored in the site design, and the playground right now, the majority of the playground is here, but there's a significant delta between the elevation, so that this is the trail is higher than the playground area for the time being. But we will make sure that the design team factor that into the site design development.
So I guess two questions, just because I'm trying to visualize this. So by doing this, I'm just thinking, if I'm at the baseball field in the old design versus this new design, is it further back? Is it, if I just drew a straight line, is it basically moving further back from, say, the street?
So it is further back from Gay. But I don't think it's not 100 feet further back because of the way we're shifting it. It's
58 feet is what the current measurement is, so that it's shifted by 58 feet from if you were to measure from Gay Street.
Okay. And I know we don't have an exact cost number, but what would drive? Why would the cost?
Sorry, can someone can you put yourself on mute if you're? Thanks. Sorry.
I know we don't have an exact cost number, which is fine, but why, I guess it's just a simple question. Why is it more expensive to shift it?
Yeah, so Tim, I'm going to let you, or Chin, I'm going to let one of you speak to that.
Okay, hold on for a second, let me. So the issue here is that if you see that this gray, the white area here is that by moving the entire complex this direction, that you have to effectively create more roadway, because connecting from this loop road over there. And I think we will be looking at this in terms of how you design this portion of the roadway, perhaps that we will bring this over so that we reduce the amount of increase of roadway. But this is this was done basically last night to try to rearrange that. And so there will be some amount of increase of roadway, and therefore that there will be more drainage system that has to be factored in, and we will be we will be developing more site because basically this area here is all going to be additional development of the site, and then so there's more earth to move, and so that those are going to be a factor. While you say that, okay, we remove a little more trees down this end, but then we will be removing less trees here. That would also be the case, but the net result will be there will be more. We at the moment we anticipate there will be increase, but this is a very last minute. I don't want to be. I want to be honest about it, and then so we don't have the. We don't want to say that this is a zero increase and then come back and then say no, that's not the case. But we anticipate there will be some changes.
If I could just jump in a little bit, just to follow up on that. So Tony, if we think about this, there's aside from paving, we have sidewalks, curbing, stormwater infiltration, like Jen mentioned, additional landscaping. There's a whole, all the cut and fill, additional ledge. There's from shifting over, basically developing another acre and a half of land. So with that comes all the associated site development costs.
Yeah, and as we said, things like designing of the parking lot, right? Like maybe we could redesign this to save on the paving costs, or we could sort of figure out how we can bring that number down, whatever the number ends up being. But again, and I realize that I'm springing on you guys sort of last minute, and I apologize for that. But as I said before, I do want to get this right. I do, and this schematic design, like now is probably the time to do it. Certainly not in a month or 2 months, and so. We don't have a full picture of the cost. We're hopefully going to have a better picture of the cost next week. And even on that, I'm hopeful that maybe we could be creative and improve on whatever we're looking at next week. But there will be additional cut and fill, as Rob and Tim have said, where you have to cut into more land and then fill in more land. Now, we may make up for that on the sort of northeastern side where we're doing less, right? But I don't think it's a net game. So there will be a cost impact that this group needs to consider. And we just don't have that number yet.
May, I think you've done all you can for us this morning. I think the work needs to be followed through on and talk with the right people. So, I think we can move on from this. I just encourage us to get to the budget.
Okay. Any final questions? All right. I'm going to turn it over to Tim, who's going to walk us through the budget.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes.
You're fine.
Yes.
So I think we're going to walk through the whole sort of presentation because it includes the schedule. So
Yep.
Just to kind of remind people, this is the original, this is the schedule that we talked about in terms of what we approved last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, with the bridge funding. So kind of just to kind of get back at that. These are the options that we looked at.
I think there was a question, Tim. Sorry, can you go back 1 second?
Sure.
I think we had gotten a question, I can't remember when, about, why there was, with option 2, there was an estimated around $700,000 additional. And I think we had put this in here just to remind people that if you look at this slide, you'll see the construction start in options 1 and 3 is July 2022, but in option 2, it was December 22. So that sort of 6 month or 5 to 6 month delay. And I think we get into is what would create a 700,000 estimated additional cost. And I think the next slide sort of gets into
Right.
where that comes into.
Right. So this is sort of an explanation of that 720, which is really, that's a far more exact number than we think it, we can actually predict, because it's a projection based on that, what we've been carrying as escalation, which is 3% annually. So what essentially what we take, well, if you can just go back there, sorry about that. Essentially what we take is when we escalate costs, we look at the start of construction. I mean, people do it differently, but generally speaking, what we have figured is the time you go to market is when you apply escalation. And we have been doing this consistently here. So we've just, that 720 is largely just a pro rata portion of the construction cost, extending the start date out 5 months. So that's what that 720 is. Another aspect, just to remind people that of that schedule shift, that we always feel that we think is a benefit, and that or the result of the early start, I should say, the result of option 3 was to avoid starting construction in December, which is not a good time, as we know, as we look out the window now, to start construction. Sometimes it even kind of pinches up where you actually don't effectively start till that spring. So that was another kind of unquantifiable savings that we feel is being able to start this project at kind of an opportune time to start construction. So that's kind of just quickly talking about the costs of the impacts of the schedule shift. Does anyone have any questions about that? Because I know we did have a question about the 700, and I just want to make sure we deal with that because it does impact the bridge fund.
Tim, I just want to say that I think members of Finance Commission have raised this issue, and I think it's important to speak to, as you just did, your experience and why this is an approach that makes sense. Because I think for people, it's like, what, it feels somewhat arbitrary, and I think your experience shows us that it is grounded in past projects and the right approach.
Okay, so we'll deal with that obviously with FinCom, but does anyone else on this committee have any questions about it? All right, so next slide, please. So this meeting today is to kind of go over the budget. So we'll start with construction costs. We're going to go over the whole budget though, soft costs and how the MSBA calculates eligible reimbursement. So we're going to start with construction costs, as obviously it's the single biggest portion of the cost. But as you can see in this slide, this is the slide that we saw the last meeting when we approved the final construction amount of 69.5 million roughly, which was based on the reconciled cost estimate we had of 70.8 minus the roughly $1.4 million of various accepted value engineering issues around the site and aesthetics. And we don't need to, I don't think, go back to discuss those. But so we start with a $69.5 million construction cost. We have 2 alternates which are not in the project budget, so they're not accounted for right now. But if the bids came in, well, we've talked about both of these, but if the bids came in under budget, we may decide to elect to use them. If not, particularly the landscaping is one that we would analyze through the course of the project, whether we decide to add it in, depending on how the costs are going in the course of the project, even up until the end. Next slide, please. So when we look at project costs, just to this may be a little bit of elementary for most people, but some people it might not be. So when we look at project cost, we're looking at construction cost plus soft cost. So the construction cost we talked about, the soft costs are all those items in light green. So it's the OPM fee and site, OPM and administration and site quality control and site investigations make up 2.5 million. The A&E fee, the Doran Whittier and their consultants, and some other additional services that we know we're going to need in the course of the project make up roughly $8 million. The furniture, fixtures, and technology, so that's all the loose furnishings and the technology that isn't built into the building systems, that make up $1.8 million of the project. Roughly, that's half and half. We have a number of miscellaneous costs that we've carried funding for that we know we see on every project. In this case, because of the high sustainability targets, we're carrying a little extra money in things like enhanced commissioning, which allows us to make sure that the building envelope is performing the way it's supposed to perform, as well as other costs that we know that will total somewhere in the order of $1 million, $950,000. And then a project contingency, which is independent of the contingency we have for design development, that is located in the 69.5 million. If you recall, that's based on that 69.5 has a contingency for design development as we move this project through the design process of about 10%. So we have contingency in the 69.5. The contingency you see that's 4.1 is made up of a construction contingency of roughly 5% of the costs, which is for potential change orders. So during the course of the project, when issues arise, whether they're owner scope adds or design issues that need to be rectified or unforeseen conditions, we have a 5% contingency for construction change orders. And we have roughly a 1% contingency for miscellaneous soft cost change orders, whether there's overruns in those other buckets in the light green. So that's another $4.1 million of contingency, bringing the soft cost total to 17.3, which is basically on target with what we had projected when we were looking at projecting a not to exceed cost for the total project back in the June preferred schematic submission. So that brings our project cost at 86.8 million. Remember, just bear in mind that we've told the MSBA again back in June that when we were being conservative, we were at 90.1 million or a number similar to that. So we're fortunately we're under that in terms of the MSBA conservative not to exceed cost. Next slide, please.
Tim, sorry, how much is the design contingency? And you said it's in that construction cost of 69, right?
Yes. So the design contingency is 10% design and development contingency. There's also an escalation contingency in that, Brian, which is based on 3% annually. So MSBA reimbursement calculation. So when we look at the MSBA reimbursement, and I think if you remember, we've talked about this back early on about the issue about what's eligible and ineligible, and we'll talk more about it here. But essentially, you take the total project cost, and deduct the ineligible cost, which we'll discuss more detail, and then you multiply that by the town's reimbursement rate, and that gives you the estimated maximum MSBA reimbursement. So that is the maximum grant amount that we use for calculation of town share and tax impacts. It is always this is just something to remember as we look at all this. Everything is subject to audit as we move through the MSBA process. So we'll be submitting monthly the invoices and the costs, and that gets audited in real time at that point and reimbursed in real time. And sometimes we have back and forth with them about things that they feel are ineligible that we feel are eligible, and that'll be part of the process. There's also a completed project audit at the end of the project where they do a full audit. Again, just to remind people that that's the estimated maximum grant, but subject to audit of actual costs. Next slide, please. So ineligible costs. Ineligible costs. So we mentioned there are a number of costs that are ineligible by just categorically ineligible. And then there are other costs that are subject to caps that the MSBA has. So I'm going to try to go through. Those are, obviously, as you can see, they make up a significant portion of the cost. So the first one is fairly simple. The asbestos flooring that's in the current school, the abatement of that, which we need to do to demolish the building, is not eligible for reimbursement. So that's been a policy since the beginning of the MSBA. The site costs above the 8% of construction trade costs, that's the site cost cap, which is $5.8 million under the old, this is of course pre any costs related to that we just talked about in terms of potentially increasing the buffer in the neighborhood. That's $5.8 million under the current design. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The construction cost above the MSBA cap is, so the MSBA caps construction at $333 a square foot. And we'll talk more about this, but that cost above the cap of, because we're above $333 a square foot, is $28.5 million. And then the two under it are essentially the pro rata share, they're related to the cost above the cap. So they basically also take a portion of the general conditions and the escalation that are above the cap, and that is taken out as ineligible cost as well. So that's the 36. So that total for ineligible costs under the current Form 3011 is 36.1 million.
Hey, Tim?
Yeah.
It's Ken Aries. Just
Ken.
keep in mind with the asbestos, all the pipes in the tunnel were all covered with asbestos?
Yes, we know. Yep. That is covered, by the way. That is eligible for reimbursement.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. It's just the flooring. It's just the vinyl, the asbestos containing flooring. So if we look at the construction cost above the cap, these are the sort of major components of it. We have, as you recall, when we've gone through the space plan, a number of areas of the building that are outside the not reimbursable by the MSBA. The gym square footage that exceeds their allowance, that's categorically ineligible for reimbursement. The extended learning areas, a portion of that is not eligible for reimbursement to meet the ed plan that Westwood has. The extended day in mother's room, so fairly small amounts in staff workroom, and then of course the grossing multiplier that sort of that is applied to those numbers. That's all the corridors and sort of non-usable space. That brings it up to 16,600 square feet, and roughly $9 million of that 28 million. The next item, which I mentioned, is the MSBA has historically capped construction. They've applied a construction dollars per square foot cap since the beginning. They, as you'll see on one of the upcoming slides, they don't escalate it consistent with construction inflation. And they essentially, currently, this $333 reflects a basically cost from 2013. So we have some, I wouldn't say, well, there's some premiums related primarily to the net zero project we're doing that have made our dollars per square foot number a little higher than some, but pretty consistent with net zero buildings. And we'll see that when we go through the project. But it still very much exceeds the $333 per square foot. So that makes up the lion's share of the cap. And just quickly, the MSBA they don't try to indicate that is representative of what you should try to, that a construction building can be built for now. They're pretty much basically saying, which I think, frankly makes sense from a public policy perspective, is they have a limited amount of dollars to spread around, and their way of doing it is to sort of be equitable about it, is to spread that cap as equitably as possible. And so that's why that cap is as low as it is and not kept up with inflation. Just go back to that slide just quickly. The excess site beyond the cap, we are, every school project that we're involved in, particularly in the suburbs, but exceeds the site cap because of the available site development that you don't have. Again, that's an urban, that's an equity-based number. They don't want to penalize urban schools that don't have the space to make development in play fields and parking. We do have a little, excuse me. Sorry. A little bit of a wise guy here.
You can just keep going. Don't worry about it.
So Yeah, we do have ledge, which, you know, is an impact on that, but we're beyond that by about $6 million, the MSBA cap. Again, this is before the decision on the buffer. And now if we can go to the next slide. So this is actually from the MSBA website, and it's really to show people the relationship of that cap of $333 a square foot to construction costs over the years. And if you go back to 2011, that was the last year they aligned, which was pretty much in the depths of the recession in terms of the impact on construction. And so from then, average school construction costs have increased pretty significantly, and the MSBA reimbursement gets bumped up. And as you can see, it's been at $333 for quite a period of time now. It probably is, and if they voted between now and our PSBA, we will, our project scope and budget, we will, if they vote an increase, we'll benefit from that. But right now it's $333. So that you can see where we're projected to be on that cap. I mean, on that construction cost line, we're somewhere around $614 a square foot, which puts us essentially in line with the average of most of the schools in that histogram there. Next slide, please. Just looking at our project from a construction cost standpoint relative to some current similar projects, you can sort of, it's pretty self-explanatory. These are all net zero, you know, or high sustainable projects. We're basically at $614 a square foot. That's pretty much consistent with the other projects that are being done in this area for elementary schools. As you can see, I don't think there's a need to explain it. It's pretty self-explanatory. Next slide, please. So some of the costs that are ineligible, also soft costs, some soft costs are ineligible for reimbursement. Any costs related to legal fees or permitting, any cost you know, that the town expends with their permitting consultants and peer review consultants that we will have to pay for the town are not eligible for reimbursement. We have the Doran Whittier contract that's in the budget has been, the MSBA caps both the OPM and the architect's contract at 3.5% for the OPM and the architect at 10%. We have some things particularly related to sustainability that have, we've been back and forth with Doran Whittier. We're working with Mayor and the town purchase and Michelle about both our contracts actually. But we are above the MSBA cap because we have reduced the construction cost so that we're above that cap on the Doran Whittier service by $240,000. Moving and mailing costs and things like that are not eligible for reimbursement. The furniture, fixture, and technology is capped and has been at the same number since the MSBA, I believe since they started the program even, but it's $1,200 a head for each. And we are, as every school we're involved in, are above that cap in terms of furniture and technology. And then they also cap the eligible contingency for reimbursement at 1%. So remember, I noted that we carried 5% for construction contingency. The MSBA caps the eligible reimbursement for construction contingency at 1%, and they cap the eligible reimbursement for soft costs at 1%. So we're above both of those items by $2.8 million roughly. So that's $3.7 million of ineligible costs for soft cost. Next slide, please. So now kind of just continuing the calculation, if you look at our project cost of 86.8 minus those ineligible costs of 36 for construction, 3.7 for soft cost, brings us to an eligible cost subject again to the audit of 46.9 or pretty close to $47 million. So that's what we will apply as we talk about reimbursement. We'll apply the reimbursement against. So the base rate, the MSBA reimbursement rate is based on a base rate plus incentives, various incentives. our base rate in Westwood, which was decided based on basically the demographics of the town, at 35.4%. The maintenance incentive of 1.93% is the maximum you can get is 2%. And I can tell you based on our history that I'm not sure we've had one at 1.93%. They usually run in somewhere 1.6 to 1.8. So that's a very good and that's a tribute to the district and to Ken and all his staff for what they do for maintenance. That's essentially looking at how the town maintains all its school buildings and based on a questionnaire. And then the green incentive is the 2%, which we've talked about, which we get by being LEED certified building and meeting certain energy requirements. So that's the maximum you can get under the sustainability incentive. So that puts us to 39.3% as a MSBA reimbursement rate. Walking through kind of the math again, and you apply that 39.3% to the eligible project cost, we come up with $18.5 million as the maximum total facilities grant. So the grant that the MSBA will not exceed $18.5 million.
And Tim, just to be clear, when we say maximum total facilities grant, we mean the reimbursement, right? I think that's the term.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the term they might use, but it's what we have been referring to as the reimbursement.
Yes, correct. So does anyone have any question? Let me just look at, all right. So, well, just wrapping this up. So you can see this is applying that reimbursement to the total project cost. We end up with 68.3 million. The effective reimbursement rate, and just for reminder purposes, in our planning, when we've talked about this in the past, I think we've been using about 20%. EMEA has been using 20%. We've always known we were going to have we would have a reimbursement rate that was, significantly less than the published rate. So that puts our town share at 68.3 million. In terms of with an effective reimbursement rate of 21.3%.
And Tim, based on the other projects that you've worked on, would you say that this 21.29% net reimbursement rate is consistent with the other projects you've seen?
Yes, I mean, I think it's
that are in
obvious.
the pipeline?
Westwood is a more affluent town, so some people start with a higher base, but it's that difference between the base rate and the effective rate is pretty consistent.
The Lexington has a similar base rate, and the most recent project that they're almost done is that one has an effective reimbursement rate of around 20.25, I think, and they have a similar base rate as Westwood.
Since this is all subject to MSBA audit throughout the process, what is the number the town will vote on?
The town will actually vote on the 86.8 number. You have to vote for the full amount, and then the and MSBA will reimburse. So the 68.3 number is, and Pam can get into the details. It's basically the long-term bond cost to the town. You have to have the capacity to borrow 86.8. But then the long-term bond would only be the 68.3, because by the time that you convert it to the long-term bond, you would have received the reimbursement from MSBA.
And that 68.3 is really the authorization to borrow. You wouldn't borrow that unless you needed it. Naturally.
Yeah, and that number 68.3 is the maximum authorization. Right. Or whatever this number ends up being at the end, when we go to town meeting.
So the town meeting, by the reason that you have to vote for the 86 number is because by law that you have to have the capacity to pay the project fund. But in reality, you would never borrow anywhere near that number, because as the project move forward, you get reimbursement. So this is a pay as you go process, that you're not paying not the old SBA process, if people remember that. So that what you would do, what would happen is that the town actually borrow the the town would never actually exceed the 68 number because of that, because it's a pay-as-you-go process.
One thing I do want to just make sure people realize, because it will come up, they'll stop payment reimbursement. They always hold the last 5% as kind of retainage until we go through the audit. So the reimbursement at 95% complete does pause until we get through the audit.
They were, so that 95% applied to the maximum facility grant.
Right.
And these number will probably change a little bit because this is the projected number, and MSBA need to
Yes.
review everything.
That's an important.
What do you typically see? Like, this is our estimate. We know it's subject to audit. Do you think that reimbursement amount will go down substantially or minimally, or what's your experience?
I think
That
it's
18.5 number.
the 18.5 is based, I mean, typically on most projects, on school projects, they don't come up to their full project cost. We have savings usually because we've been conservative in contingency. So if we don't have the same amount of project costs, we're not going to have the same reimbursement, and the town share goes down proportionately. So traditionally, you won't receive the maximum total facilities grant, but neither will you receive the maximum town share.
Right.
So
Okay.
both
So
of them.
regardless, we're not going to get this 18.5 because we're hopeful that 86 number will go down.
Right.
And consequently, the 68 town share will go down.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
The reimbursement is paid throughout construction based on invoicing?
Reimbursement is every month, which is happening now. We do the VIP that Westwood receives, and we process a reimbursement request. I mean, and it usually, if the month doesn't have a lot of costs, we kind of bundle up a couple of months, but that's happening.
Yeah, just to add one point, it's just that currently that the town has submitted a little over $1 million, and then we have gotten $350,000 back from MSBA already for the feasibility phase. John, you had something?
I do a point and a question. One, kudos to Ken Aries and his team for raising the bar on the facility standard.
Yeah.
Would you say it went up 1 or 2 points?
We were at 1.93.
1.93. But the maximum we could have gotten was 2. So, I mean, Ken is pretty much as close to perfect as you get.
Not that high, but Ken came in and he raised it up. So kudos, Ken, and your team. And the other one was there was 2 contingencies that were at 1%, and we're carrying 4 or 5%, which I mean 4 or 5% seems what it should be. Why is the reimbursement rate only 1%?
The MSBA only caps on contingency for change orders, construction contingency. They cap it at 1% of the construction cost, based on sort of a historical thing that they have done. When it comes to change orders during construction, they won't pay for any change orders that are added scope. So, and they can be fairly, that can be a judgment call. But if there's a decision to add, if a change order is due to a decision to, add a sink in a place where there wasn't a sink or some added scope purpose, they will not reimburse that anyway. So that 1% that they will reimburse up to, which, by the way, that reimbursement only comes at the end of the project. They tell us during the course of the project what's eligible, but the actual reimbursement doesn't get paid until the end of the project. That 1% is based on their history of what they've seen as a lot change orders they will reimburse, which essentially relate to design coordination problems and some kinds of unforeseen conditions. They won't reimburse, for instance, unforeseen conditions that already exceed in the site because we're already exceeding the cap on the site. So that's why they cap costs at contingency reimbursement at 1%.
Excellent.
But it's obviously, wise on any project, and 5% is kind of a traditional contingency to carry on new construction.
I think Josepha has her hand up.
Right. I'm just wondering, at what point, Pam, can you give us a number or make public a number that your tax rate will increase by?
Well, we've provided that estimate already.
Right.
Yeah.
We've given that estimate to Maya and the FinCom and the Select Board. And then it's just a matter of when you want to get an updated number based on what the project budget comes in at.
Yeah, so originally we were gonna sort of go through that today, but with the new site work, we wanted to wait until we had that estimate. And so we could factor that in, and it may not, I mean, if it's $500,000 increase, that probably won't impact the tax share. I don't know if $1 million will, we just didn't know the scope of it.
That's a question that's being asked around town.
Yeah. So next Friday, I think we'll provide that information.
Okay, thanks.
Unless, I mean, we can certainly do it now. I don't know if we have time. It's not on the agenda. I'm not sure if, I think it's within
We're
the
at
scope
8:59.
Yeah, well, probably have, Tim, are we almost done with this presentation?
Yeah, I think
We're done.
Slide.
Oh, okay. Pam, are
but
you
does anyone
comfortable
have any
sort of
comments?
sharing? Well, before we do that, why don't we go back, and I'm just going to circle around to people and see if anybody has questions on the budget presentation or discussion.
Mine's just more of a communication piece. I think as we get into that, I think the 18 million is really what we should focus on, that's money that we will lose if we don't approve this project. Because the complexity of the percentage reimbursement is probably a lot for most people to take. And I think the other message, particularly for longtime residents, is the 21 is different than the 59 for the high school. So the high school has 20 years of inflation as well as a really different reimbursement rate. So just I think I'm messaging, those were my two takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that at the end of the day, if you look at this from a net perspective, we're basically getting 2 elementary schools for $68 million,
Right.
Which is, I think, a really, really good deal. And I think the high school, we had such a good deal on that, but that was the end of that program. I think that we sort of slipped in there. We were one of the last schools in that program. That program has not been in existence for about almost, 15 years or 20 years. So I know people like to refer to the high school and say, why can't we have, 60% reimbursement, but nobody's gotten 60% reimbursement for 15 years.
Right.
And so I think those 2 points are very important points to make, that,
Exactly.
it's almost $18 million off of the cost of this project.
Right.
So, any other questions?
No, there's just a little irony that the mother's room is not reimbursed. So much for Beacon Hill caring about working mothers that they mandate.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No, I trust
that's
me.
an editorial comment.
I asked that too, Tony. Why is the thing that is required by law ineligible? That doesn't make sense to me, but oh well.
I can't even touch that one, Tony.
Tony, that one had been raised with MSBA. Trust me on that one. And it is one side of Beacon Hill is not talking to the other side of Beacon Hill.
Okay, Pam, I don't want to put you on the spot. So if you'd prefer, we can certainly put the town shared discussion for next week. I defer entirely to you. I specifically said to Pam that we weren't going to talk about it today because I thought it made more sense to talk about it when we had these additional numbers. So I don't want to put her on the spot. Oops, I think you're muted.
No, I can do one quick slide.
Okay.
Can I share a screen or?
Yeah, John, does she need permission to share a screen?
Pam, you should be able to do it.
Okay. Okay, can people see that? Okay.
Yep,
so we have sent this package out to people. We've called it draft because the numbers will change and we're happy to update that as we go along. But just so you know that we have been sharing this. I'm just going to go to one slide here. This is the estimate of the tax impact. So this is based on the cost of 86.8 million, the reimbursement from MSBA estimated at the 18.4, the total town cost 68.3 million. And as Chin said earlier, the town only issues this bond here for the 68.3 million. It has to vote approval of the $86 million, but we would only be bonding this. So looking at what's that cost of that bond, we would issue that bond as a 30-year bond. We didn't have that option when we had the high school project. That was a 20-year bond. We now do a 30-year bond for any of our major buildings. The police station is a 30-year bond. It spreads the cost of the project more fairly among the residents who are going to come and go over the next several years and utilize that building. So this is designed to not put more cost on residents today, but to share it with residents who will be benefiting from this building for many years to come. So the bond cost on a 30-year level debt payment bond, that's also a little bit different. Sometimes we do, this is like how a mortgage is. We'll have a level payment of principal and interest every year. Versus having a level principal and declining interest, which is what we more typically might have for a bond. Again, this is done to better spread the cost among future residents and not overburden current residents. So the total cost of issuing that $68.3 million bond for 30 years at an estimated interest rate of 4% would be $119.5 million. The annual payment for that, $3.9 million. We're showing the cost in two ways. The cost of that to $100,000 of home value so that people can estimate based on their own home. And then the cost of our average home, calculated by Department of Revenue right now, is about an $837,000 home. They currently have an annual tax bill of $12,375. The total cost for the whole project to that home, that $837,000 home, would be $17,000, and their annual average cost $591. So each year they'd pay $591 in taxes with this size home. $71 here for each 100,000 of home value. So if people were at a $500,000 home, it would be the 71 times 5. So those numbers would change based on what the final budget is. I will point out we're using this 4% interest rate. That's a conservative rate. We won't be borrowing this for a couple of years. We don't know what the interest rate would be. We would hope it would be less than that, and most likely less. So this is a conservative look, probably a bit higher than what it might actually be when we issue the bond. We do want to point out, we've talked a lot about that the high school bond is ending. Seems like yesterday we were talking high school, but now we're coming to the end of the 20-year bond. That was a $44 million bond for 20 years, reimbursed by MSBA for 59%. The total payments a house paid for that project was about $4,700. In the last year, when that bond comes off and we would be issuing this new bond, about $60 to this average home would come off their taxes because we're stopped paying for the high school bond. So when this bond comes on and the high school bond comes off, it's about a $591 increase and a $60 decline because of the high school being completed. So it would be a net $531 increase to the average home in town. Again, we would update that with new numbers. Could show that in different ways.
Was the high school a declining, sort of the declining type bond?
Yes, and that's why we have in here a slide to show.
Okay.
It was a declining bond. This bar shows the total debt we pay every year in the high school, so it declines each year. And the MSBA, we were in that old program, and it was completely different. You heard Chin say that we get reimbursed for now as we pay as we go. Back in that old program, you had to issue the whole bond, and MSBA gave you an amount every year to apply to your principal and interest. So this bar graph shows the total we're paying every year in the high school. It finishes in FY23. The blue shows the MSBA payment They pay us a level 1.4 million a year. So every year in our taxes, the amount that people have been paying for the high school goes down. It goes down slightly each year. It's not enough for people to really feel in their bill. That last year, we would be collecting total about $406,000 because the last year of the high school bond is $1.8 million, but 1.4 is being paid by MSBA. We paid 400,000. You can see just a number of years ago that was much, much higher what people were paying in their taxes. So on average, people paid $233 a year for the high school debt. But as I pointed out, in that last year when it finishes, it's about $60.
So Pam, can you go back to the other slide? Yeah. So if people wanted to calculate their own rate, they would take their assessed value of their house, divide it by 100,000, and then multiply it by, and I can't see the bottom of that slide for some reason. I don't know why I can't, but multiply it by, I guess, 71 minus 720. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So,
and as we move forward and you get into more presentations, we can adjust this to, whatever people think is clearer to show.
Yep.
We could show a net line. We don't have that here. We could show, we're going to show this home, the 837,000, but we could show some other typical home costs. We could show a $600,000 home so that everyone doesn't have to go and calculate their own. We could kind of pick some home ranges if people wanted to do that. So we're happy to kind of show this in whatever way people would like.
Great.
I would want to just quickly, so there will be two adjustments that are going to happen. One is whatever we decide to do around this issue around the moving of the building. But then the second is, and Chin touched on this, we have to, we will have back and forth with the MSBA on our numbers. So I just want to make sure we won't know the results of that until we have that what's called the Project Scope and Budget Conference, which will be under the current schedule sometime in March. So that will make some adjustments. I don't expect it to be significant, but I don't know how many times we want to go back out with multiple numbers. That's all. I would just, at some point, we probably want to do it once, I guess.
No, I agree. I think this gives people a sense of, it gives them some sort of proportionality. I think that, we recognize the numbers will change, but I think this is helpful for people to understand, at least initially. I mean, we've got these numbers in front of us today, right? So this is what it would cost with the numbers that we're all looking at right now, understanding that these are all subject to change.
Pam, I know this is not exact, but if you were to go out to the debt markets tomorrow, what would be the interest rate just today on February 5th, 2021?
1.5%.
Okay.
Right now, it's crazy low.
Pam, could we, the members of our committee, get copies of these two charts you just put up?
Yeah, so there's a couple of other pages in this thing. I'll send the whole package. I'll send it to John, I guess.
Yeah, thank you.
One thing that I should make clear is that the budget right now is basically the projection, and then that the reason that you go through that in the process of getting the MSBA approval, they will review every single line item, and then so that when they approve the project, you will have a definitive amount of the reimbursement that MSBA team they agree with in terms of whatever they agree the maximum grant amount. And so the goal here is that if we submit, we will be able to know that by April in the April MSBA board meeting.
Okay.
Does anyone, thank you so much, Pam. Again, sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay.
So we've talked about the site change. We've talked about the budget. We've talked about the tax the town impact, the town share and the tax impact. Are there any other questions or any comments or any thoughts? I don't think we're not voting on anything today except for approval of minutes. So anything final? Nope. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to the action item, which is a vote to approve the school building committee meeting minutes of January 22nd, 2021. Can I get a motion to approve? Can I get a, is there any discussion on the meeting minutes? No. Okay. Ken,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Allison,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Charlie,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Mary Kate,
Yes.
Jen, Abby,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Lemma, Josepha,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Motion is carried. All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn? 15 minutes early. And a second?
Second.
Second.
All right. Ken,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Allison,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Charlie,
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Mary Kate,
Yes.
Jen, Abby,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Lemma,
Yes.
Josepha,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
and Tony,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
and I am a yes. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your patience.
Thank you.
And